It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend getaway. The small log cabin nestled at the edge of the woods had been in the narrator's family for decades, serving as a retreat from the chaos of daily life. Surrounded by tall pines, with a quiet lake only a short walk away, the cabin stood as a symbol of privacy and serenity. The narrator had planned a simple weekend of relaxation, reading, fishing, and enjoying the stillness of nature. But what unfolded that morning would spiral into an ordeal unlike anything they had experienced before. It began with an unusual noise, the sound of multiple car engines approaching from the winding gravel road that led to the property. At first, the narrator assumed it might be a neighbor's gathering or perhaps lost hikers looking for directions. But soon, the reality became impossible to ignore. Vehicles, SUVs, minivans, and luxury sedans began lining the narrow dirt path, their tires crunching over fallen leaves. The air filled with the chatter of dozens of voices, laughter, and the unmistakable sound of music playing from portable speakers. Stepping outside, the narrator was stunned to see people unloading coolers, folding chairs, and decorative items. It looked less like a casual gathering and more like preparation for a large event. Confused, the narrator scanned the crowd until one figure stood out, a woman in her late 40s with perfectly styled hair, oversized sunglasses, and the air of someone who believed she owned every space she walked into. She barked orders at the arriving guests, pointing toward the cabin's yard as though it were a venue she had booked months in advance. Within minutes, strangers were walking across the property carrying boxes of flowers, crates of wine, and even what appeared to be an archway for ceremony. Tables were dragged out and set up directly on the grass, while children darted toward the lake as if it were a public park. The narrator could only stand frozen, trying to make sense of what was happening. This wasn't just a family reunion or a party. It was something far bigger, an entire wedding. The realization hit hard when a man in a suit called out to a commanding woman, addressing her as if she were the host of the event. She responded with a smug smile, proudly declaring that this would be the perfect spot for a wedding with over 100 guests. It became clear she had convinced everyone that the cabin, a private property, had been reserved exclusively for her event. The narrator attempted to intervene, making it clear that this was private land, but the woman, soon revealed to be the self-proclaimed head of the neighborhood HOA, waved off the objections. With a dismissive flick of her hand, she insisted that she had reserved the property months in advance. She spoke as though she had unquestionable authority over not just her own home but the entire area, including the narrator's cabin. The more the narrator tried to explain, the more her tone hardened. Guests began to side with her, treating the actual owner of the cabin as if they were an intruder in their own space. Some rolled their eyes, others avoided confrontation, but the mood shifted into a hostile standoff. As the tension mounted, the woman escalated the situation in a way no one expected. Without hesitation, she pulled out her phone, loudly announcing that she would be calling 911 to report the narrator for trespassing on her reserved wedding venue. The narrator's peaceful weekend had officially turned into chaos, and the sound of her voice on the phone marked the beginning of a battle that was about to spiral completely out of control. The HOA woman, phone pressed to her ear, paced across the property as if she were the rightful overseer of the entire cabin and its land. Her tone was sharp and commanding, filled with feigned outrage as she told the emergency operator that an armed intruder had broken into her reserved venue. The narrator could hear every word, each accusation more outrageous than the last. She painted a picture of danger, insisting she feared for her guests' safety, despite the reality being nothing more than a property owner defending their land. Her guests, emboldened by a display, began whispering among themselves. Some nervously shuffled their belongings, unsure if they were truly welcome, while others scoffed at the narrator with cold stares. A few even muttered that it was rude to disrupt someone's wedding day. The crowd had been successfully manipulated, their loyalty secured by the woman's air of authority and her position as the HOA president. Within minutes, the sound of sirens cut through the laughter and music. The gravel road trembled under the weight of police vehicles speeding toward the cabin. Guests scattered to make room as officers stepped out, their expressions tense, scanning the scene for the supposed intruder. The narrator's heart pounded, knowing that the situation had been twisted completely against them. The woman wasted no time rushing to the officers, tears conveniently welling in her eyes as she painted the narrator as a dangerous squatter refusing to leave her venue. She gestured toward the cabin with dramatic flair, claiming that she had booked it months ago for her daughter's wedding and had contracts to prove it. Her performance was convincing enough that a few officers turned their focus on the narrator, their questions sharp and direct. But the narrator was prepared. With calm determination, they explained the history of the cabin, the deed that had been in the family for generations, and the fact that no permission had ever been granted for such an event. They pointed to the lack of any written agreement, the absence of any booking system, and the sheer absurdity of the claim. Still, the woman doubled down, producing a stack of printed papers that she claimed were permits. Upon closer inspection, they were nothing more than HOA newsletters and internal documents with no legal authority. As tensions escalated, one officer requested identification from both parties. The narrator produced their driver's license and property deed, proof beyond doubt that they were the rightful owner. The woman, however, grew defensive, her voice rising as she insisted that the HOA had jurisdiction over all homes and cabins within the community. She argued that her authority as HOA president extended to renting out the property for events, regardless of ownership. The officers exchanged skeptical glances, clearly recognizing the absurdity of her statements. Still, the scene was tense. Guests stood frozen, some embarrassed, others angry. Decorations hung awkwardly unfinished as a supposed wedding day unraveled before their eyes. The woman's daughter, dressed in a flowing gown, looked on with mortification as a confrontation overshadowed what should have been her special day. Despite the mounting evidence, the woman refused to back down. Her face reddened with fury as she shouted that the narrator was ruining everything, that they would be sued, and that the police had no choice but to remove them from her venue. But the more she yelled, the more her credibility eroded in front of everyone. The narrator, though shaken, stood firm. They could feel the tide beginning to turn as the officers pressed the woman for actual proof. Her facade was cracking, but she wasn't done yet. In one final act of defiance, she stormed toward the cabin, declaring that if the police wouldn't enforce her authority, she would. Her hand reached for the door handle, determined to push her way inside. And at that moment, everything shifted, setting the stage for the explosive final showdown. The woman's hand gripped the cabin door as if ownership could be claimed through sheer force of will. Guests gasped, some trying to stop her, while others watched with wide-eyed anticipation. The narrator stood rooted to the ground, unwilling to let their family's cabin be violated. The police, realizing her next action could escalate into trespassing and property damage, quickly intervened. One officer stepped forward, firmly blocking her path. The scene grew silent except for the rustle of leaves in the wind. The woman's daughter pleaded with her, begging to salvage what was left of the ruined wedding day. But the woman was too deep into her performance to back down gracefully. She shouted about her rights, her voice shrill with indignation, claiming once again that the HOA's authority trumped any individual ownership. It was a claim so outrageous that even her own guests began to murmur in disbelief. The officers, no longer willing to indulge the theatrics, warned her that continuing would result in charges. Trespassing, false reporting, and possibly fraud loomed over her like dark clouds. The weight of the situation began to dawn on the guests, who slowly started packing their belongings. Folding chairs collapsed, floral arches were dragged away, and coolers disappeared back into SUVs. The once lively yard emptied, the wedding atmosphere dissipating into an air of shame and awkwardness. The bride, tears streaking down her carefully prepared makeup, turned on her mother with visible anger. She had wanted a simple, beautiful wedding surrounded by friends and family, but her mother's arrogance had turned it into a police-involved spectacle. That humiliation would linger for years to come, a memory forever tied to the woman's stubbornness and need for control. As the crowd dispersed, the narrator remained firm, standing guard at the cabin steps. The officers, satisfied with the evidence provided, assured the narrator that they were within their rights. They turned their focus on the woman, who now stood alone, abandoned by her guests and even her own family. Her bravado cracked, her shoulders slumped, her face twisted with frustration as she realized her power had dissolved in front of everyone. In a final act of defiance, she muttered threats of lawsuits and HOA fines, but the words rang hollow. No one believed her anymore. Her voice trembled, and her authority, once unquestioned in her circle, had evaporated entirely. The officers made it clear, if she set foot on the property again without permission, she would be arrested. The narrator watched as she was escorted back to her car, the once commanding figure now reduced to muttering excuses under her breath. The fleet of vehicles that had invaded the gravel road disappeared one by one, leaving behind only tire tracks and a lingering echo of chaos. When silence finally returned, the narrator stood on the porch, looking out at the woods. The cabin, though rattled by the intrusion, remained steadfast, a symbol of resilience. What was meant to be a peaceful weekend had turned into a battle for dignity and property rights. But in the end, truth had prevailed. The woman's lies had crumbled, her reputation shattered, and the cabin remained in the hands of its rightful owner. The narrator knew this wouldn't be the last time an HOA president tried to overstep, but this encounter had proven one thing beyond doubt. No self-proclaimed authority could strip away the rights of a determined homeowner willing to stand their ground. The weekend might not have been peaceful, but it ended with something far more valuable: vindication. Do like, subscribe for more video.